Does an animated Transformers movie change the game for the franchise? Hey everyone, welcome to Cinema, where we focus on the film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought of Transformers 1. Was it good, was it bad, or somewhere right in the middle? Or if you're waiting for this review to help you decide if you're going to see it or not, make sure to like this video if you enjoy it, subscribe if you haven't already to join in the film culture community where we talk about a lot of cinema as a whole, and getting right into synopsis. Transformers 1 presents us with the origins of Optimus Prime and Megatron, how they were once friends and now sworn enemies, and how that all changes the fate of Cybertron forever. And getting right into the positives, overall this is a film that's well animated, and getting Josh Cooley to direct this film, who has also done Toy Story 4, has a sense of familiarity with the animated movies in general, and so how the animation flows throughout, it is good looking for something that has a unique style of how it looks and everything that's presented. It runs smoothly on throughout with the talking and everything you expect. And as a Transformers film, this is great because we're finally getting a prequel film to what we got in the live action movies, and in general manages to take us to Cybertron and tell us a story that solely focuses on the setting of Cybertron, which finally explores something that is not so familiar to us and creates some vibes and creates some cultural evidences that becomes compelling just by that pure nature of not being familiar. And so how we get the origins of Optimus Prime and Megatron, what their names were before, and how they get to be close friends, how they fall apart by the end, just goes about an interesting way that pulls itself off in a relatively told story that has a great narrative beats along the way, has some familiar choices, what we've seen in other films, but still being able to pull off some good vibes along the way, good story beats that manages to pull you in, keep you attentive to what is going on, and having a great voice cast, particularly with Chris Hemsworth and Scarlett Johansson coming from the MCU, and just what we get out of their voices. Chris Hemsworth is rather good as an Optimus Prime when we're not getting Peter Cullen, and so even though you are familiar with their voices from where they're coming from, you're still believing that they work for their characters involved. And so how that all plays on throughout, you're getting some good characters that play relatively familiar to ideas and things we've seen in the past, but naturally it begins to build upon its story with ideas and what it's doing with its characters, and goes about from Act 1 to Act 2 to the great third act with a great final battle, and pulls off the ideas and certain twists along the way, what you're playing on throughout with the story, and how that manages to capture some great momentum, especially within the final battle, within the final act of the movie, that goes to the ultimate twist of where you're expecting this story to go, even if it has some things that you're not always expecting to go about along the way. That's what manages to make this film stand out as a whole. It's just a fun family film that creates a great Transformers Cybertron world that we've been wanting a prequel film for a while. And so this is satisfying, and finally manages to fill that void we've been wanting. And that leads into the mix elements. There's some ideas, certain tropes or whatnot that goes about in familiar fashions, and there's ideas or bits of comedy that can be a hit or miss, because comedy, it doesn't always ring true to everyone. I'm not always big into comedy, but there are some jokes here and there that do work effectively for me. So I'm putting this in the mix elements because you may love it more than I have, or you may dislike it more than I have, based on how the tropes flow on throughout, how the jokes are going about, and certain repetitive motions, things that may not be as funny to others, especially once they repeat jokes over and over. They can go on a tangent based on that that loses focus to the flow of the story, what you're expecting. Maybe it's not great in the mixture of drama and flow of what you're building up in this sci-fi world, losing and sacrificing some nature of the world building or character building that is all focused on some building some comedy into the mixture as well. This takes me right into the negatives, to which I have to say there's so many familiar elements that I've seen with this story that it almost lost my attention at certain bits, because even if it's telling a good story, it has some good character beats and tropes along the way. Some of those tropes can feel so familiar and so offbeat or momentous to what it's trying to tell its story as, that you can predict exactly the message it's trying to present, some themes or ideas, or even the specific dialogue that it's trying to show. And so when that all gets compiled all into one story, it manages to take my enjoyment back of the story, manages to take away my focus, because it's beginning to feel way too familiar, way too predictable to the general outcome of certain things that go about along the way. I didn't know the synopsis going into it, so there were some moments that did throw me off, but even without knowing the synopsis, I knew generally how it was going to flow on throughout, because of the way things flowed, certain character tropes that shone through in obvious motions. One character, Optimus, is sort of this good guy, and Megatron, or how they set him up before he was Megatron, is just having some snarky remarks, things that go about along the way to be not the best attitude, and going about in a intrinsic motion, which has a good motivation for the character, but again, it takes me out of the story and takes me out of the investment into the characters, because it feels like I've already seen this type of story flow about throughout so many times before with other films, whether it's based on a Transformers movie or other films that I can't particularly name, but don't necessarily care, because it's not building too much more upon the world or upon the culture just enough for me to care and enjoy the look of the animation, what it's doing with the world, but not exploring too much deeper into what their food is like or what it looks like when they're tired, because there's certain parts where they're overworked, but you're not necessarily seeing what the drawback is on having these robots being overworked. And so there's certain narrative beats here and there that it's missing the substance of exploring what it actually looks like for these robots to operate, or certain things. And I'm not trying to get into the technical details of every bit of mechanic, how everything functions, because it's still exploring and showing you presentations of what it looks like to transform and what it looks like to be a part of a community and having a good theme. But it ultimately still loses the sense of being able to capture a realistic approach or something more to the characters that's not a one-note beat to its character, not always exploring proper motivations that can really get me that much more invested into where it's all flowing on throughout, to which the first two acts of this film especially is where it really felt most familiar, and it really took until the third act to really get me going into this film. And while I don't have much big complaints about the film for what it's doing, how it's playing on throughout the tropes, those tropes are really what takes me out of being able to enjoy the film that much more, which I have to rate the Transformers 1 a simply 6.5 out of 10. Let me know all your thoughts on Transformers 1. Was it good? Was it bad? Or somewhere right in the middle? Make sure to like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe if you haven't already to join in the film culture community where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole. So that's just all, and make sure to do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.